Black Belt team at Microsoft, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the new offering. It's currently in preview, the Cloudnox Permissions Management Platform. Just to give you a little bit of a background, Cloudnox was a standalone company for a long time. So we were in business for several years in the permissions management space, working with a lot of different verticals and enterprises. And we'll talk about the specific value proposition and the problems that we've historically solved. Now, we were at the end of last summer acquired by Microsoft. Since that time, we've been working on a repackaging, rebranding effort. And as of last month, we just launched into a preview program. So I'll talk to that preview program in a bit more detail towards the end of the slide deck, and then again, be more than happy to answer any questions for the folks on the call. I probably don't need to emphasize this point too much with this audience, but ultimately, a lot of the world is no longer focused on a single cloud, right? Even folks that are newer to their journey, folks are, the majority of environments are going into multi-cloud environments. So really, what does that mean, right? So, some of the challenges, I always like to focus on that last metric. We're going to talk about the value prop, the functionality, all the use cases the Cloudnox addresses. That last metric, really, when Cloudnox models data, right? One of the things that the permissions management platform does is we're ingesting all the activity from your environment, right? Whether it's AWS, GCP, Azure, et cetera. And what we see when we model that activity, what have your identities historically have used, we seldom see more than 5% of permissions granted actually used, right? And what we identify is, you'll hear me refer to this concept of the permissions gap. So one of the main elements that we model when we're analyzing an organization's environment is we look at the permissions granted versus the permissions that we've actually modeled being utilized, right? That delta, which is usually huge, right? That's what we refer to as the permissions gap. And we're going to talk about some of the strategies that we use to help eliminate that permissions gap in your environment, right? It's just an unnecessary attack surface. So what this slide is trying to convey is that multi-cloud's complex. It's no longer the world of, simply human users, and worrying about what their permissions are, right? You've got all varieties of different workloads, multiple clouds, right? You've got a lot of complexity in these multi-cloud environments, all of these human as well as the non-human entities that require permissions in those environments, and how do you track those? So ultimately, what Cloudnox wants to do is we want to give you a full view across all of your cloud environments, right? We want to be able to tell you every action performed by every identity on every resource, right? That's really the problem statement we're looking to solve in a complex multi-cloud environment. So just to step back before I get into the platform specifically, Cloudnox falls into the cloud infrastructure entitlement management space. You'll hear that referred to as CIEM. All the analysts, Gartner and all those folks, they do have reports out on the space. But ultimately, what we're looking to do is give you the visibility and the remediation tools to help identify and fix excessive privileges across your environments. Today, that's Azure, AWS, GCP. And just so you know where we fall into the Microsoft Zero Trust framework, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today, the value proposition, the features, the functionality, and specifically around remediation and removing excessive privileges, it's really going to have a high focus on least privilege, right? You're going to hear me refer to that when we get into the product and some of those features. Least privilege is a core tenet to what Cloudnox does and how it fits into the Microsoft Zero Trust framework. So Cloudnox is going to give you a unified view across all of your clouds, right? We start by ingesting all of that activity data and mapping it. So you can have a consistent view of all of your identities, human and non-human, all of your resources, so you understand risk, okay? And we're going to talk more about risk in just a moment, but we want to identify risk. We want to help you prioritize those candidates for least privilege in your environment, right? Give you the automated tools so that you can not only gain that visibility into those excessively permissioned identities, but also give you different options depending on your appetite for automation on how you can fix them, right? And then lastly, this collection, this modeling, it's not a one-time effort, right? We don't just come in, ingest data, make recommendations, or fix your environment, right? Your environments are constantly changing. This is a very fluid type of a platform in the sense that as permissions, as your environment changes, we're constantly updating our recommendation, updating our remediation strategies in your environment because your environment's going to be constantly changing, right? We're always reaching out, grabbing deltas and permissions and changes in your environment and rolling those up and making new recommendations. So if we apply this to a life cycle approach, right? Step one is always discover and assess, right? Just try to understand the scope of the issue in your environment, right? We do that with what we refer to as one of those things we talked about earlier about I'd further define risk in the environments. So when you look at identities, every identity that we ingest, remember, the core to what we're ingesting from the various platforms is activity, right? We want to know every permission, every identity is utilized over time. And we map that. Now, every identity in the platform has a risk score associated with it, right? That just helps you prioritize those candidates that are excessively privileged. So that risk score, what we do to determine risk is we look at the delta between the permissions granted and permissions utilized. We look at the resource reach of a particular identity, right? Can the identity reach 5 resources? Can it reach 5,000? And then we also weight the permissions that have been granted, right? Are they, writes and deletes? Are they lists and describes? And we assign a score, right? And I'll show you in the platform, ultimately how that looks, but it's just a vehicle that we use to help you prioritize some candidates that need some level of action within the environment. And then once you get that discovery, we provide a suite of remediation tools depending on your use case. And we'll talk about remediation a bit more in some of the follow-up slides as well. But from a remediation standpoint, we want to be able to right-size these identities. And then once your environment is right-sized, again, this is not a one-time effort because your environment's going to be constantly changing, but let's just say you're in a perfect state of least privilege. Okay, every identity is sized appropriately. We also have our own just-in-time access that we provide. It is complementary to other tools like Azure PIM, for example, but our approach to just-in-time access is based on self-service, right? So we allow a requester approver workflow based on any use case where you have a developer, an administrator, a contractor, a task worker, seasonal worker, whatever the use case is, any self-service on-demand permissions elevation, that's what our just-in-time access is designed to do. And then lastly, right, we provide a whole suite of a large reporting module, customized reports, out-of-the-box reports. We also do anomaly detection and provide a lot of forensic reports as well. So remember, anomaly detection, we talk about that. That's really just a byproduct of our modeling of the activity in your environment, right? We know that baseline of how your identities behave. So since we know how every identity behaves, if an identity deviates from how we've modeled that behavior, we can issue, an anomaly detection alert, report, trigger, a variety of different remediation options based on the nature of that alert. But it starts with, if we detect that an identity is issuing, permissions in an unusual pattern, if they're using a high-risk permission for the first time, if they're issuing permissions from a rogue geography or a different geography that we've modeled it to behave in the past, right? Those are all anomalous activities that we're going to help model and develop a security framework around for you. So in the discover and assessment piece, right, I think I kind of jumped the gun and defined what that privilege creep index is, or that permissions creep index is within your environment, right? Every identity across every cloud is going to have that risk score assigned, and we'll give you an aggregate risk based on your Azure subscriptions, Google Cloud projects, AWS accounts, and we'll also give you individualized at the identity level risk in your environment as well. So from a remediation perspective, again, we provide a suite of remediation functions. Now, in this particular workflow that's flashing on the screen right now, what this is, one of the remediation options that you'll have at your disposal is we can actually right size or apply those principles of least privilege based on activity. So the way the workflow can work, and there's different levels of automation depending on where you are as far as your appetite for automation, your journey in the cloud, et cetera. But this workflow, what we can do is we can actually look back at everything in identities utilized over a period of time. So if you were to take, let's just say, an Azure group or an AWS role or a Google Cloud Service account, right? We'll look back and just say, look, I've been alerted to the fact that this identity is overprivileged, okay? Tell me, what is it actually used over the last 90 days? What permissions has it used? And you can use that as a baseline where we can actually create a customized role in AWS and Azure. We can create a custom policy in the context of AWS based on that modeled activity. Okay, now, to avoid role sprawl in your environment, right? You can do this in bulk. So for example, if you want to model the activity of, if you've got, let's just say, hundreds of AWS roles or hundreds of managed identities, hundreds of service accounts, right? You can still reduce that attack surface massively, even by doing that analysis in bulk and right-sizing those permissions in bulk as well, right? So there's a lot of different use cases. And one of those top remediation use cases is simply take the activity and build a customized permission set based on the activity that we've modeled those identities actually utilizing, right? You can also use this framework within the environment to model inactivity, right? You may simply want to just say, look, show me all my inactive identities within the environment. And then based on that output in bulk, maybe you'll want to do something like, these are all inactive, remove the AWS admin policy, remove the owner role, right? You can take those steps as well, right? We'll recommend, removing those highly privileged roles. Maybe we'll recommend, moving it to the next role down, right? It really just depends on your environment and what you find from a remediation standpoint fits your environment the best. And then lastly, monitoring and alerting, right? So we have a suite of both out of the box, customized alerts. When we get to general availability, and I'll emphasize that we're not exposing a lot of the integration capabilities over the course of the preview program. Historically, right, you're going to need to ingest this data downstream, whether it's a customized alert or an out-of-the-box alert, reporting, same thing, right, where the ability to actually generate this content, but also potentially send this content downstream as well. So that's all I had for slideware. I do want to close by just saying that, again, we are currently in a preview program. I can talk a little bit about that, right? The preview program is launched from your Azure AD tenant. And obviously, I'll post in the chat the full documentation around how you enable it, how do we ingest the data. But I do want to take some time and make sure that I pause to answer any questions for you folks today.
From a licensing perspective, would this be included or a bolt-on to an A5 license strategy?
So right now, I'll emphasize over the course of the preview program, there are no, there won't be any, commercial requirements. You can try it for free over the course of the preview program. We haven't published the licensing yet, but I will tell you that it's likely going to be a standalone licensing model, and we're going along the lines of on a resource-based licensing, right? So basically, you tell me how many resources you have in your environment, we charge per resource, this will be your price per year, right? And then obviously if you consume more. We'll talk about, what the true up options are there, but it will be a resource-based licensing. It'll likely be separate from any of the current, Microsoft licensing frameworks today, and it will be resource-based. And from a resource standpoint, what we mean by a resource is we're going to license, those compute resource, those workloads that use compute, right? So it's going to be, and again, the terminology differs a little bit across the clouds, but VMs or EC2 in the context of AWS, but VMs, databases, containers, and serverless functions.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions, folks?
Can you clarify? So you mentioned the actual resources right now, but what if we're trying to just monitor permissions from a directory perspective? So whether that be Azure Active Directory or Azure, actually this would be more for the Azure ecosystem, I assume then, right?
Yeah, so I get asked that question every other meeting. And I'm glad you did, because I really need to put a slide in here and because I get asked every other meeting. So it's a great question. What you're describing is roadmap for post general availability, right? We're targeting GA by the summer. Between now and the GA timeframe, you can look for more defined roadmap information. Today, we're ingesting data, permissions, mapping everything at the infrastructure level, right? So this is subscription level today. We are looking at doing a deeper dive, into the directory, Azure Active Directory, right? So we can actually frame the excessive utilization and frame the permissions at that level. But today, I do want to emphasize it's infrastructure today across Azure, AWS, GCP. But I get that question all the time, and I would imagine within the next, 30, 45 days, we'll probably have, target roadmap items for that specific ask.
All right then. Can you? I know you're Neil. I know you're going to share the deck with us, so I can post that up there. But if you could just copy and paste that Cloudnox public preview link into the chat window so that people can click away on it now.
Yeah.
I
And
greatly
just,
appreciate it.
that if, I'm on my overview screen right here in my Azure Active Directory tenant, and your overview screen, you're going to see that this is your launch point for that preview program. And this is the link to the documentation that you'll need for that. And I'm going to pop that into the chat right now.
So Charles did ask a question. I wonder if this will cause a downgrade of functions to the Office 365 security functions. I don't think it will. I think if anything, it'll probably force Microsoft to have more granular approach to our roles that we have, so that somebody can fine tune or customize a role for somebody when needed. What do you think to that, Neil?
No, I mean, I think that's accurate, right? I mean, I think, I talked a little bit about this, right? Where, Cloudnox has been around a long time, and we've chosen to maintain support for Azure, AWS, GCP. But one of the other drivers why Microsoft acquired Cloudnox was actually to integrate the technology with the other elements in the Azure Microsoft stack as well, right? So again, we've been so, really focused on getting the rebranded, repackaged program we just launched the preview, and now we're just starting to define what is the post general availability of this product going to look like, right? We're always going to be multi-cloud. We're always going to support AWS. We're going to be adding more, and we're also going to be taking this technology and integrating it with other elements in the Azure Microsoft stack as well. I know it's sort of a broad statement, but there'll be a lot more definitive content around that as we get closer to GA.
Do you see any type of direct integration to the Defender platform?
So yes, and so it's funny you mentioned Defender specifically. So Defender for Cloud, we actually had a compliance module in Cloudnox as well because we were a CIEM or are a CIEM platform, but the acronyms are getting blurred, right? So I'm sure you folks are likely aware, or some of you are aware of CSPM, right? The cloud posture management solutions. So from our standpoint, we actually did support a compliance module in the Cloudnox permissions management platform. We actually noted that there was a lot of overlap in functionality with Defender for Cloud. So we actually removed the compliance module. But to your point, yes, we are going to be doing deeper integrations with Defender, with Sentinel, with Azure reviews within the platform as well as a deeper inspection at the directory level. And then again, hopefully when I can, I will share with you, where the priorities are and when you can expect to see those first level of integrations happen. But they're absolutely all in play.
One of the things that I'm a little concerned about is the agent sprawl. Every time we add a function into the cloud, whether it be, hey, I need to get the Azure Sentinel, I need to send everything there. Well, I also have Tenable, right? I need an agent there. I need the Defender for endpoint or host, right? It just keeps stacking up with these bolt-ons. That's the reason why I'm looking at it. Are you going to try to tightly integrate and to pull your telemetry directly from the Defender agents or platform?
No, that's a great point. I'm actually going to make that note. I could speculate. I've been involved in some of those meetings when we're talking about the level of integration and the nature of the integration. But let me talk to the product management team, and I'll shoot your response back through Steve on that one.
So, Neil, I'm gonna kind of throw you on the spot here.
Please.
When talking about Cloudnox to a couple of customers already, a couple of them said, "Hey, getting all this information," and my answer is it's probably a post GA function, but I don't know, so I'll ask you. Maybe you do. But one of the questions was, "Hey, Cloudnox is going to return all this great information, but if we have to go around and define custom roles or define different roles for people based on the information, it's going to be too much work for us to even wind up bothering doing. Is Cloudnox going to have a recommendation that says, hey, this person is a global admin, but they only use these 5 privileges. We advise you to pick this role based on what their usage is."
Yeah, no, that's exactly where the product's going.
Right.
And that is one of those shorter term post GA. So we have strategies today so that you don't get, role fatigue within your environment. I can share those. I mean, to your point, operationalizing this is key. So yes, that is a roadmap item to build a very automated recommender within the product today. Today, it's a little bit more, manual. I do that as part of, the exercise when I work with organizations, right? I can make those recommendations. It's a little less automated than it will be, but we're absolutely going in that direction.
Did you mention when you're planning to go GA?
If I didn't, and I don't think I did, the plan right now is at the end of Q2. So calendar Q2. So the plan is, I think we're looking at a formal date, I believe is just mid-July, right? I think July 15th is the target date that right now we're targeting, and there's a big push and emphasis to hold to that date. But again, right now it's the target.
And Neil, the public preview is going to go until that date. Plus, I think someone said, 90 days or something like that after GA, people would still get to use it.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
So whenever you're going to have some runway at the end of, once we make that general availability announcement, that we won't, again, it's free of charge. You can continue in the preview program. It's either at 90 or 120 days. I have to verify that myself.
Yeah.
Post GA, that you'll still have the platform available.
Yeah, so I suggest everybody to go ahead and sign up for it. And again, when you enable Cloudnox and you add it to your subscriptions, or I forgot the was it the workspaces in Google? I think it's what it's called there. It doesn't do anything from a changing of permissions or anything like that. All it's doing is analyzing, unless you set up some sort of automation. But right out of the box, it's not going to affect anything. And the fact that there is no agents, it's not going to, slow anything down or take any type of performance away from anything.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, one other piece to note is when you do enable this, the installer will actually ask you, right? Do you want to just have visibility, or do you want to actually be able to invoke, any of the least privilege or remediation elements? So you'll have a choice there, right? And just so you know, at a high level, really what enabling Cloudnox does is you're basically spinning up an enterprise application, enabling the service principal, and then across whatever subscription you want to collect from, and just talking in the context of Azure, and I can talk to the others, but you're just going to give it the reader role in a designated subscription if you just want the visibility. And if you want to perform remediation at a broad stroke, I would typically recommend user access administrator. But again, if you have specific remediation thoughts in mind, we could probably even scope it down further than that. But anyway, at a broad stroke, it's, basically you're going to have an application in your environment, either at a subscription or management group level, give it the reader role, and we're going to be able to ingest it.
And I do have to say that the steps to enable it, the Cloudnox lays it out for you. It tells you do X, Y, and Z, steps 1, 2, and 3, and it'll actually do everything for you. So it's actually pretty easy to enable, because I did it in my own tenant, and I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, and I was able to get it going. So,
and it's going to get easier, right? I just want to make sure I emphasize too that, the preview program, I think we're just coming up to, I think it rolled out about a month ago. And so we're going to be making enhancements over the course of the preview as well. And I think onboarding, especially in Azure, the other clouds, I think are streamlined as well, but Azure, shouldn't take any more than 10 or 15 minutes to get that onboarded. But we are making some refinements to actually even make it even smoother from an onboarding standpoint.
all right. So I'm gonna. Oh, did somebody have a question or? Nope. Any last words, Neil, before I stop the recording?
No, I appreciate everyone's time today, and I look forward to everyone's feedback on the preview program. Thanks, folks.
All right, gonna stop the recording.